watching Dante Boxing Nation.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So Shawn Porter, he continues to put pressure on Terence Crawford to take the fight. For those of you guys who don't know, Shawn Porter is now Terence Crawford's mandatory. Shawn Porter, he just recently did an interview with Brian Custer and he said a lot. The main thing he said that stood out was, now we're at the point where all Terence Crawford has to do is say, yes, I want the fight. You know, and at first it was a time when Porter was going back and forth, like he didn't really know if he wanted to take the Spence fight or the Crawford fight next because he's also Errol Spence's mandatory. But in this interview, he made it very clear that he now wants Terence Crawford. He wants Terence Crawford more than he wants the Errol Spence fight. He went so far as to even say, he said he knew when he was training, he said he was training the other day and he was thinking about Terence Crawford. He said that's when he knew that was the fight he wanted for sure. He also wants the fight because he noticed that's the fight that the fans want the most. And he's right. The fans want Crawford versus Porter, certainly more than Porter versus Spence in a rematch, because people want to see how Terence Crawford is going to do against Porter in comparison to how Spence did against Porter. I mean, this is a 50-50 fight, and there's no guarantee that Crawford is going to beat Shawn Porter. That's why it's such a great fight. I mean, whoever wins this fight puts them in perfect position to get the Errol Spence fight. Now, if Terence Crawford gets the fight, it gives him great leverage going into negotiations for an Errol Spence fight. And that would further put pressure on Spence to take the fight, especially if Terence Crawford were to go in there and he could beat Shawn Porter more decisively than anyone has ever done. We all know that Terence Crawford, he wants the best guy at 147, which is Errol Spence. But if Errol Spence is not going to fight you next, which he is not going to fight you next, it makes all the sense in the world for Terence Crawford to fight Shawn Porter next. Now, once again, Porter, he said he's just waiting for Crawford to say yes right now. Now, while he's waiting for Terence Crawford to say yes, it's my understanding that it would also help the process if Shawn Porter were to contact the WBC and order that mandatory position. Matter of fact, one of Crawford's team members, he even said if Porter really wants to fight, all he has to do is contact the WBC and make it official. So hopefully Shawn Porter does that, or hopefully Terence Crawford just comes out and he finally agrees without Porter even having to do that. This is the fight that Terence Crawford should be taking next. It makes all the sense in the world if he can't get the best guy at 147, which is the guy he wants. Speaking of the best guy at 147, because you Canelo Alvarez fans continue to try to compare Canelo's situation to any other black fighter, instead of comparing Canelo's situation to Golovkin's, because that's the only guy you really should be comparing Canelo's situation to, because those guys have almost everything in common right now. But they're only going to compare Canelo to black fighters because I always tell you guys, this sport is based on race, nationality, and pride. Even though I strongly believe that Crawford needs to take the Porter fight next, when you Canelo fans try to compare Canelo's situation to Floyd Mayweather or a Terence Crawford, all you guys do is make Canelo look even worse, because then we have to point out the dichotomy, the difference between what Crawford is doing and what Canelo is doing. What Crawford is attempting to do versus what Canelo Alvarez is attempting to do. We all know that when it comes to Canelo Alvarez, when he was at 160, he did not want to fight Jamal Charlo. He did not want to fight Demetrius Andrade. They were both champions in that division. He didn't want to unify at 160. Instead, he vacated his belt when Charlo was his mandatory. He moved up to 168. And now that all the champions are white, there are no more black champions. Now he wants to unify all of the belts. Now, so whenever people talk about Canelo ducking Charlo and Andrade, you always hear a Canelo fan now say, oh, well, look at what Crawford is doing. Crawford is doing the complete opposite because Crawford is going after Errol Spence. Errol Spence is that same Demetrius Andrade. He's that same Jamal Charlo that Canelo is avoiding. In fact, the only difference is Errol Spence is more accomplished. Errol Spence is considered pound for pound one of the best fighters in the world. Errol Spence was the boogeyman at 147. That's the guy that Terence Crawford wants. He is doing the complete opposite of what Canelo is doing. The only reason Crawford needs the Porter fight so desperately is because he cannot get the fight he really wants, which is the Errol Spence fight. And once again, him fighting Porter gives him leverage to getting closer to making an Errol Spence fight. But we all know if this was football, if this was basketball, if this was the Olympics, boxing Olympics, we already know that when you're in the playoffs, you play against the next team that won in their bracket. You don't play against the team that lost in the playoffs, right? So it makes complete sense if you really think about the fact that Crawford never really wanted to fight the guys that just lost to the fighter that they actually wanted. And he wants to fight the guy that has already advanced in the playoffs. That's the way it's supposed to work. Canelo Alvarez said he wasn't going to fight Andrade because he didn't like his style. Oh, but he likes Avni Yildirim style. He likes Caleb Smith style. He likes BJ Saunders style. He likes Amir Khan style. We know what time it is. And this is the reason why Terence Crawford is pound for pound the best fighter in the world. Because you will never hear Terence Crawford saying, I'm not fighting that guy because I don't like his style. Because you know what Terence Crawford is going to do? Terence Crawford, he's going to adjust. He's going to adapt. And he's not only going to beat that style, but he's going to beat that style. He's going to beat them at their own game. We all know that if Canelo Alvarez was a natural welterweight, he was in the division with Errol Spence and Terence Crawford. If he won't fight Andrade and he won't fight Charlo, and he's saying that he doesn't like Andrade's style, there's no way he would have fought Errol Spence or Terence Crawford at the natural weight. No way he would have did it. Now, of course, he's willing to fight them if they have to move up 2 weight classes, of course. Just like he would have did the same thing with Charlo and Andrade. If Charlo and Andrade were welterweights right now, and they wanted to move up 2 weight classes, he would fight them then. But he ain't gonna do it if they're the same natural weight. But Terence Crawford is willing to do it. So you Canelo fans, you can continue comparing Canelo to whatever black fighter you want. But I'm telling you right now, once we look at the facts, once we look at the numbers, because all of this stuff is documented, all you're gonna do is make Canelo look worse. The only fighter you can really compare to Canelo Alvarez right now is a Gennady Golovkin or maybe an Oscar Valdez. Because unlike Terence Crawford, Oscar Valdez, he also vacated his belt to avoid a slick American black fighter named Shakur Stevenson. He pulled a Canelo move. Listen, man, Terence Crawford has never vacated his belt to avoid some undefeated mandatory. In fact, you guys remember one of his mandatories was an undefeated Mexican fighter by the name of Jose Benavidez. Jose was first at 140. He had been calling out Terence Crawford almost for 2 years. Before he had even moved up to welterweight, he was calling out Terence Crawford. He was undefeated. He became Terence Crawford's mandatory. I believe he was his mandatory. And I just want you guys to imagine if Terence Crawford would have vacated the belt instead of fighting Jose Benavidez. And then they give the belt to Jose Benavidez. And then Terence Crawford, instead, he goes out and he fights some type of Rocky Fielding guy. A guy that has already been knocked out in the first round. He fights that guy instead of fighting Jose Benavidez. You already know what people would be saying about Terence Crawford. So it's like, even with the Shawn Porter situation, I mean, if you have people trying to criticize Crawford for not fighting Shawn Porter yet, who's coming off of a loss, you already know what they would say if he vacated his belt to avoid an undefeated Jose Benavidez, who had been calling him out for 2 years, calling him out of his name, confronting him in public on camera, doing all of these things. We already know what people would say. I mean, man, I can go all the way back to Floyd Mayweather versus Robert the Ghost Guerrero. Do you know that people were saying in my comment section that Floyd Mayweather was ducking Robert the Ghost Guerrero? Oh yeah, the comments are still there. Because Robert had been calling out Floyd for a long time. Same thing with Canelo Alvarez. Fans were constantly saying Floyd Mayweather is ducking Canelo. Soon as Floyd Mayweather signed the contract to fight them, all of a sudden, they changed their energy. Then they started saying, oh, Floyd is going to beat him because of this reason, because of that reason. You see the games that they play? They would have did the same thing with Terence Crawford, is my point. We know what time it is at the end of the day. So I'm going to say this again, or I'm going to end the video saying this again. If Terence Crawford can't get the #1 guy at 147 that he wants, it makes all the sense in the world, and it is extremely beneficial for Crawford to take the Porter fight. That puts him in the loop, and if he can do something to Shawn Porter that no one has ever done, that gives him great leverage going into an Errol Spence fight. It puts a lot more pressure on Errol Spence to take the fight. You're not going to do that if you end up fighting someone lesser than Porter. I don't believe that Terence Crawford would ever pull a Canelo and vacate his belt to avoid Shawn Porter. But let me tell you right now, if Crawford did that, I would be the first person to make a video, and then you could really compare him to Canelo. I'd be the first person to tell you Crawford just pulled a Canelo Alvarez. The only way he should be vacating that belt is if he's moving up to fight Canelo Alvarez himself, or he's fighting against Errol Spence or someone like that. There's no other reason for him to vacate the belt, which is why I don't think he would sink that low. Let's see how this plays out. Hopefully we get an announcement for this fight in the next couple of weeks. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one. Fellas, I've got some great news for you. If you've lost your hair or have a receding hairline, the time has come when you can finally get your hairline back through a process called scalp micropigmentation. So here's how it works. It's a hair tattoo that replicates the look of your hair follicles when you have fully shaved it down. So if you want to get this hookup, for my brothers out there in the UK and Europe, make sure you check out the Scalp This on Instagram. And for my brothers out there in the States, make sure you go ahead and contact my man Scalp Carolinas on Instagram. All right, now check this out, guys. If you're looking to repair eczema scars, burns and bruises, dark spots and blemishes, then this right here is the perfect product for you guys. It's called Elo de Key Face and Body Oil. Athletes and top-ranking boxers, they're also using it after training to reduce swelling, inflammation, and to ease the pain. So get yours today. Go to elodekey.com, like them on Facebook, and follow them on Instagram. Listen, I'm telling you guys right now, in the world that we live in today, one of the most important things in life to have is a good lawyer. And I can vouch for this one right here, because this brother is my personal lawyer. So if you need any type of legal representation, if you need legal advice, if you're having problems on YouTube, on your regular job, or whatever it is, contact lawyer, mediator, and business consultant Issa Israel's law firm. I've been knowing this man for a while, and he has been a true blessing to me. I'm telling you, he's affordable, he will work with you, but most importantly, he's not gonna just treat you like a customer. He will have your best interest. So to get in contact with him, go to iilawfirm.com or consultsglobal.com.